Her family took everything from her, so she married the billionaire CEO they feared the most. Nia's voice trembled with raw emotion. Every single painting in this room, I created it with my own hands. For 5 years I poured my soul onto these canvases. And not one of them bears my name. Robert stepped closer, his voice dangerously low. What are you saying? I'm saying that Michael Rivera, the artistic genius everyone worships, doesn't exist. Every masterpiece, every breakthrough, every piece that made Brown Galleries millions, was all me. They stole my entire identity and left me with nothing. Robert's eyes blazed with something between fury and fascination. And now? Nia turned to face him, her smile cold as winter. Now I'm going to destroy them. All of them. And I need your help to do it. Welcome back, Golden family. I'm thrilled you're here because today's story is unlike anything you've heard before. And if you're new to our family, that subscribe button is your ticket to the most compelling stories on the platform. Now, let's get back to the story. Nia Brown had always known she was different from the rest of the Brown family. While they spoke in numbers and profit margins, she spoke in colors and emotions. While they saw art as a commodity, she saw it as life itself. Her converted warehouse studio in Queens was her sanctuary, paint-splattered tables, canvases in various stages of completion, and the intoxicating smell of oils and turpentine that had become her life's perfume. This morning, like every morning for the past 5 years, she stood before her easel putting the finishing touches on what would become the centerpiece of Brown Gallery's upcoming Manhattan exhibition. The painting before her was extraordinary. 3 months of her soul poured onto canvas, a raw, emotional exploration of isolation and hope that seemed to breathe with life. Every brushstroke carried the weight of her experience, every color choice reflected depths of feeling that most people spent lifetimes trying to understand. Tomorrow, this masterpiece would hang in Brown Gallery's flagship location with a signature that wasn't hers. Just like the 46 other paintings she'd created over the past 5 years. All bearing the name Michael Rivera in the bottom right corner. Nia's phone buzzed against the paint-splattered table beside her. Richard Brown's name flashed on the screen, and her stomach tightened instinctively. Her adoptive father, the man who'd built an international art empire on her hidden talent, rarely called this early in the morning. The board meeting has been moved up. Richard's voice was crisp and businesslike through the speaker. We need to discuss your future with the company. Something in his tone made Nia pause mid-brushstroke. She'd been asking for more recognition lately, more creative control over her own work. Maybe this was finally her moment to step out of the shadows. What time? She asked, already mentally preparing to clean her brushes. 2 o'clock. Don't be late. The line went dead, leaving Nia staring at her latest creation. For 26 years, she had been the invisible engine behind Brown Gallery's meteoric rise to prominence in the international art world. Every piece that had established their reputation, every painting that had drawn collectors from around the globe, every work that had been featured in prestigious museums, all of it had come from her hands, her vision, her sleepless nights and passionate dedication. By 18, when her work had matured into something truly spectacular, the arrangement had crystallized. She would create, they would sell, and everyone would benefit. The Brown name carried weight in the art world. Connections to museums, relationships with collectors, the credibility that turned talented artists into legends. Without our resources, our reputation, our network, Richard had explained back then, you're just another struggling artist. But with the Brown name behind your work, you can reach heights most artists only dream of. It had made sense at the time. She was young, grateful, and desperately wanted to belong somewhere. The Browns had given her a home when she had nothing, and if the price was anonymity, it seemed like a fair trade. But 5 years later, as Nia cleaned her brushes and prepared to leave her sanctuary, that trade felt less fair with each passing day. She watched through gallery windows as critics praised Michael Rivera's genius, as collectors paid millions for her work, as her adoptive brother gave interviews about his artistic process and creative inspiration. The warehouse felt smaller these days, more like a prison than a sanctuary. She'd started asking questions, careful, respectful questions about recognition, about credit, about the possibility of showing her work under her own name. The responses had been swift and dismissive. Don't be ungrateful, Nia, Elena had said just last week. You have a comfortable life, a steady income, and the satisfaction of creating beautiful art. What more could you want? What more could she want? The question echoed in her mind as she locked up the studio and headed toward Manhattan. She wanted what every artist wanted. Recognition for her work, credit for her vision, the right to sign her own name to the pieces that came from her soul. She wanted to exist in the world she'd helped create. The subway ride to Brown Galleries gave her time to think, to hope, to imagine that today's board meeting might finally be the conversation she'd been waiting for. Maybe they were ready to let her step into the light. Maybe they'd realized that her talent deserved acknowledgement beyond the shadows. The Brown Galleries building loomed before her on the Upper East Side, sleek, modern, intimidating in its success. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see visitors admiring the current exhibition, many of them studying paintings she'd created with wonder and appreciation. They had no idea the real artist was walking past them on the sidewalk, invisible and unknown. Richard was waiting for her in the lobby, his expression unreadable. "You're right on time," he said, but there was something in his voice that made her skin crawl. Not warmth, not excitement about her future, something colder, more distant. They rode the elevator to the top floor in silence, and with each passing floor, Nia's optimism began to crumble. This didn't feel like a celebration or a promotion. This felt like something else entirely. The conference room door opened to reveal Elena, Michael, and several board members already seated around the mahogany table. The late afternoon light streaming through the windows should have been beautiful, but instead it felt harsh, exposing. Nia took her seat, her hands folded carefully in her lap, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. Around this table sat the people who had shaped her entire adult life, who had given her purpose and meaning and a place in the world. Richard cleared his throat and looked directly at her, his expression as cold as winter glass. "We've made a decision about your role in the company." The silence in the conference room stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Nia could hear her own heartbeat as Richard's words hung in the air, their meaning not quite registering yet. "Your artistic contributions to the company will no longer be required." The words landed in her chest like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples of confusion through her entire being. "What do you mean?" she managed to ask, her voice smaller than she'd intended. Michael leaned forward across the mahogany table, his expression colder than she'd ever seen it. Gone was any pretense of brotherly affection, replaced by something that made her blood run cold. "You've become unstable, Nia. Your demands for recognition, your threats to go public. The board has serious concerns about your mental state." "Threats?" The word escaped her lips as barely a whisper. "I never threatened anyone. I just asked for credit for my own work." Elena's laugh was sharp and bitter, cutting through the room like broken glass. "Your work? Darling, you've been an employee. A very well-compensated employee, but nothing more. The Brown name is what sells those paintings, not your little signature." Nia felt the room begin to tilt. This couldn't be happening. These were the people who had raised her, who had called her daughter, who had welcomed her into their family and their world. "I created every piece in your permanent collection," she said, standing so abruptly that her chair scraped against the polished floor. "Every painting that built this empire came from my hands, my vision. And our resources, our connections, our reputation." Richard cut her off. "Without the Brown name, you're just another struggling artist. We've decided to terminate your contract and your association with the family." The room seemed to spin around her. Association with the family. Not membership. Not daughterhood. Association. Like a business partnership that had run its course. If you've ever felt your whole world crumble in a single moment, you know exactly what Nia was feeling right now. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us deepest. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "You adopted me. You're my family." Elena's voice was ice when she responded, each word carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. "We took you in as a business investment, sweetheart. You were a talented child with no family, no connections. We saw potential profit. Now that potential has become a liability." The casual cruelty of it took Nia's breath away. Business investment. Potential profit. Liability. These weren't the words of a mother speaking to her daughter. These were the cold calculations of corporate executives discussing a failed venture. Michael slid a thick envelope across the glossy table toward her. "Severance package," he said with the tone of someone discussing the weather. "Sign the NDA, and you'll receive enough money to start over somewhere else." Quietly, with trembling hands that didn't feel like her own, Nia opened the envelope. The non-disclosure agreement was comprehensive and devastating, page after page of legal language designed to erase her from art history. She could never claim credit for any work created under the Brown name. She could never speak publicly about her role in the company. She could never contact their artists, their clients, their network of collectors and critics. She could never tell the truth about who she really was. "And if I don't sign?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Richard's smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. We have extensive documentation of your increasingly erratic behavior over the past few months. Medical records showing your emotional instability. Security footage of you destroying company property during your creative episodes. What medical records? What destroyed property? But even as she asked, Nia began to understand the depth of their betrayal. The erratic behavior was her passion, her artistic process, the way she lost herself completely when creating something beautiful. The destroyed property were canvases she'd painted over in frustration when a piece wasn't working, a normal part of any artist's creative journey. They had been building a case against her for months, documenting every moment of artistic intensity, every flash of creative temperament, every sign that she was a living, breathing artist rather than their compliant painting machine. It would be truly unfortunate if those records became public, Elena added with false sympathy. Particularly given your hopes of establishing an independent artistic career. No gallery would touch an artist with documented mental health issues and a history of workplace violence. The trap was perfect, years in the making. They had anticipated this moment, prepared for the day when she might want more than shadows and silence. Every expression of frustration, every request for recognition, every sign that she was growing beyond their control, it had all been carefully catalogued and weaponized against her. "You're stealing my identity," she said, her voice barely audible in the sterile room. "We're protecting our investment," Michael replied without a trace of emotion. "Sign the papers, Nia. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The conference room fell silent except for the distant sounds of traffic 30 floors below and the soft hum of the air conditioning. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Nia could see the city spread out before her, millions of people living their lives, pursuing their dreams, fighting their battles. None of them knew that in this moment, in this room, a young woman's entire existence was being systematically dismantled by the people she trusted most. She looked around the table at the faces of her supposed family. Richard, who had taught her about art history and taken her to her first gallery opening. Elena, who had helped her pick out dresses for important events and advised her on everything from career choices to relationships. Michael, who had been her brother, her confidant, the person she'd shared countless dinners and conversations with over the years. All of them watching her with the cold calculation of strangers. "You never loved me," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Love is a luxury in business, darling," Elena replied. "We provided for you, educated you, gave you opportunities most artists only dream of. That's more than love, that's practical care." "I won't sign," Nia said suddenly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. She stood up, pushing the envelope back across the table. "I won't let you erase me." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richard's expression hardened into something genuinely frightening. "Then you'll leave us no choice but to protect ourselves and our reputation by any means necessary." "Sign the papers, Nia," Michael said again, but there was a warning in his voice now. "Walk away with something or lose everything and face the consequences of crossing the Brown family." But Nia was already moving toward the door, her heart pounding but her resolve crystallizing into something unbreakable. "Keep your money," she said without turning around. "I'd rather have nothing than take your blood money for my own erasure." "You'll regret this decision," Richard called after her. "You have no idea what you're up against." Nia paused at the door, her hand on the handle, and looked back at the people who had shaped her entire life. "Maybe not," she said quietly. "But I know exactly who I'm up against now. And that's more than I knew an hour ago." The elevator ride down felt like falling through space. 30 floors of descent that seemed to take forever and no time at all. When the doors opened to the lobby, Nia walked past the paintings she'd created, her soul made visible on canvas, now forever attributed to someone else. The afternoon sun was brutal when she stepped onto the sidewalk, and she realized she was crying without having noticed when the tears had started. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and for one desperate moment she hoped it might be Richard or Elena calling her back, telling her this had all been some terrible misunderstanding. Instead, it was a notification from her bank. Account frozen by court order. Her second phone buzz was from her building manager. The locks had been changed on her apartment. All personal belongings had been secured pending legal resolution. By the time she reached the subway station, Nia Brown had lost everything. Her family, her identity, her home, her future. All of it stripped away in the span of 3 hours. She stood on the platform, clutching the torn pieces of the severance check she'd ripped apart in the elevator, and made a promise to herself. The Browns thought they had destroyed her, thought they had won. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The cramped studio apartment in Queens was barely 400 square feet of peeling paint and broken dreams. Nia sat on the thin mattress she'd placed directly on the floor, staring at the single window that looked out onto a brick wall. 3 months had passed since that devastating afternoon in the boardroom, and she was still discovering new ways the Browns had destroyed her life. They hadn't just taken her money and her home. They had been thorough in their destruction. Her art supplies, confiscated as company property. Her personal paintings, the few pieces she'd kept for herself over the years, seized as potential evidence of intellectual property theft. Even the photographs on her phone, pictures she'd taken of her work in progress, all of it wiped from her devices by court order. They had erased her so completely that sometimes she wondered if she had imagined her entire artistic life. The alarm on her phone buzzed at 4:30 a.m., the same time it had buzzed every morning for the past 93 days. Nia rolled off the mattress and pulled on the coffee shop uniform that had become her second skin: black pants, white shirt, green apron that smelled permanently of espresso and broken dreams. Her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror showed a woman she barely recognized. The soft curves that came from comfortable living had sharpened into angles. Her hands, once smooth from expensive hand creams and careful care, were now rough from constant washing and sanitizing. But her eyes burned with something that hadn't been there before the boardroom. Rage. Pure, crystallized rage that grew stronger every day instead of fading. The coffee shop was a 20-minute walk through Queens, and Nia used every step to think, to plan, to feed the growing storm inside her chest. The early morning shift paid slightly better, and every extra dollar mattered when you were sleeping on the floor and eating ramen noodles for every meal. But the money wasn't why she'd chosen this particular coffee shop. It was 2 blocks away from the Queens Public Library, and during her afternoon break, Nia had been conducting the most important research of her life. "Morning, Nia," called Marcus, the shop manager who'd hired her despite her complete lack of food service experience. He was a good man, kind enough not to ask too many questions about why someone with her education and obvious intelligence was pulling double shifts at minimum wage. "Morning," she replied, tying her apron and diving into the familiar rhythm of espresso machines and steaming milk. The work was mindless, which left her brain free to focus on what really mattered: finding the Browns' weakness. For 3 months, she had been studying her enemies with the obsessive intensity she'd once reserved for creating art. Every public appearance, every business decision, every interview and article and social media post. She knew their patterns, their preferences, their fears. And she had discovered something extraordinary. There was one name that made Richard Brown's confident facade crack every single time: Robert Kane. The lunch rush passed in a blur of caffeine and customer complaints, but Nia's mind was elsewhere, replaying everything she'd learned about the man who had become her secret obsession. Kane Industries had started as a tech company. Robert's genius for algorithms and data analysis had built him an empire before he was 30. But lately he'd been expanding into luxury goods, real estate, and most recently, art authentication. Veritas Art was his latest venture, a revolutionary platform that used blockchain technology and advanced imaging to verify the authenticity and provenance of artwork. The technology was groundbreaking, terrifying to galleries built on lies and half-truths and carefully managed deceptions. It was absolutely devastating to businesses like Brown Galleries. "Break time," Marcus called, and Nia was already untying her apron, her feet carrying her toward the library with practiced urgency. The computers at the Queen's Library had become her war room. Every afternoon, she claimed the same terminal in the far corner and dove deeper into the world of Robert Kane. Today's research focus: his personal history, the details that might give her insight into the man behind the business empire. What she found made her breath catch in her throat. He was everything the Browns pretended to be but weren't. A man who truly understood art, who respected artists, who believed in authenticity and truth. And he had been publicly feuding with Brown Galleries for 2 years. The feud had started when Robert accused them of selling misattributed works, of operating more like a money laundering service than a legitimate gallery. Richard had sued him for defamation twice. Robert had won both cases, his legal team providing evidence that made Brown Galleries look incompetent at best, criminal at worst. The press coverage painted Robert as brilliant but difficult, a perfectionist who couldn't tolerate fraud or deception in any form. The art world whispered about his impossible standards, his refusal to compromise, his reputation for destroying anyone who tried to deceive him. He was perfect. The plan that crystallized in Nia's mind was audacious, dangerous, and absolutely insane. But sitting in that library, surrounded by the scent of old books and other people's dreams, she realized it was also her only chance. Robert Kane wanted to destroy Brown Galleries. She wanted to reclaim her identity and her art. Marriage would give her access to resources, protection, and the ultimate revenge, becoming the wife of the man her adopted family feared most. The evening Nia finally made her decision, she was working the closing shift at the coffee shop when a news alert popped up on her phone. Brown Galleries had just announced their largest exhibition ever, a retrospective of Michael Rivera's most celebrated works. Her soul made visible, her years of passion and dedication, displayed under someone else's name while she served lattes to strangers. The rage that consumed her in that moment was white-hot and pure. She closed the coffee shop with steady hands, walked home through the dark Queen streets, and counted the money she'd been saving for 3 months. $217. Enough for one dress, one shot, one chance to change everything. The next morning, instead of putting on her coffee shop uniform, Nia Brown put on the only professional outfit she owned and took the subway into Manhattan. She had an appointment at a small boutique, where she would spend nearly every penny she had on a dress that would make her look like she belonged in Robert Kane's world. The sales associate was kind, helping her find something sophisticated yet approachable, elegant without being flashy. As Nia looked at herself in the dressing room mirror, she saw something that had been missing for months. She saw herself as a woman with a plan. That evening she would go to the underground art show in Brooklyn. She would position herself near a painting she knew would capture Robert's attention. And she would execute the most dangerous gamble of her life. The Browns thought they had destroyed her. They had no idea they had just created their own worst nightmare. Kane shows up at underground galleries in Brooklyn and Queens, always alone, always on Friday nights. Looking for the next big thing before anyone else discovers it. Nia arrived at the space between 30 minutes before the official opening, using her artist background to convince the gallery owner she was a potential buyer interested in previewing the work. She positioned herself strategically near a painting that she knew would draw Robert's attention. A raw, emotional piece about loneliness in crowded places that reminded her painfully of her own recent experience. The gallery filled slowly with the usual crowd of artists, critics, and collectors who frequented Brooklyn's underground scene. Nia nursed a single glass of wine and watched the door, her heart hammering against her ribs as she waited for the man who represented her only chance at justice. At 8:15 Robert Kane walked through the door. He was exactly as she'd expected and completely different at the same time. Taller than his photos suggested, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it and those sharp gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. He moved with quiet confidence, stopping at each piece long enough to truly see it before moving on. Nia watched him navigate the gallery with predatory focus, timing her own movement to ensure she'd be standing in front of the urban isolation painting when he reached that section of the space. Everything depended on the next few minutes, her entire future balanced on this single conversation with a stranger who had no idea he was about to become the weapon of her revenge. When your whole life depends on one moment, one conversation, one chance to change everything, how do you find the courage to take that leap? Nia was about to find out. Robert paused in front of the painting she'd chosen, his expression shifting from casual interest to genuine engagement. This was it. This was her moment. Nia took a deep breath, stepped closer to the artwork, and spoke the words that would change both their lives forever. "It's extraordinary, isn't it?" Nia said softly, moving to stand beside Robert as he studied the painting. "The way he captures that feeling of being completely alone in a crowd." Robert glanced at her, his expression guarded but interested. Those gray eyes were even more intense up close, studying her face with the same careful attention he'd been giving the artwork. "You have a good eye. Most people walk past this one." "Most people are afraid of real emotion in art," Nia replied, letting a hint of disdain color her voice. "They prefer pretty landscapes that match their sofas. This piece actually says something." She could feel him reassessing her, upgrading her from casual gallery visitor to someone worth his attention. The slight shift in his posture told her the opening gambit had worked. "And what does it say to you?" he asked. This was the moment. Everything she'd planned, everything she'd researched, everything she'd sacrificed over the past 3 months came down to the next 30 seconds. Nia studied the painting, letting genuine emotion bleed into her voice. That sometimes being invisible is the loneliest thing in the world. That you can create something beautiful and meaningful and watch other people take credit for it, while you disappear completely. The change in Robert's demeanor was immediate. His entire body went still, those sharp eyes focusing on her with laser intensity. She'd struck something deep, something personal that resonated with his own understanding of being overlooked and underestimated. "That's very specific," he said quietly. "I suppose I relate to invisible artists." Nia met his gaze directly, letting him see the pain she usually kept hidden beneath polished surfaces. "I'm Nia, by the way. Nia Brown." She watched recognition flicker across his features like lightning, surprise, then suspicion, then something that might have been interesting. His expression didn't change, but she could practically see his mind working, processing the implications of Richard Brown's adopted daughter appearing in a Brooklyn gallery. "Brown?" he repeated, his voice carefully neutral. "As in Brown Galleries." "Former Brown Galleries," Nia corrected, her voice steady despite the way her heart was hammering. "Very, very former." Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like she was a painting he couldn't quite authenticate. The seconds stretched between them, filled with the gallery's ambient chatter and the weight of unspoken possibilities. "I've heard rumors about a falling out," he said finally. Nia's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Is that what they're calling it? They stole 5 years of my life and every piece of art I ever created, then had me declared mentally unstable when I tried to fight back." "Falling out seems generous. When someone finally hears you, really hears you, after months of silence, it's like oxygen to drowning lungs. Sometimes strangers understand us better than family ever did." Robert's expression shifted again, suspicion giving way to something that looked like genuine interest. "And now you're what, looking for sympathy? An ally?" "I'm looking for justice," Nia said, the words coming from somewhere deeper than strategy. "And I think we might be able to help each other get it." The gallery continued buzzing around them, other visitors moving from piece to piece, critics taking notes, artists networking with potential buyers. But in their small corner, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. Robert gestured toward the gallery's small cafe area. "Coffee?" They found a table in the corner where the noise level would allow for private conversation. Robert ordered an espresso black. Nia asked for tea, her hands not quite steady enough for caffeine. When the server left them alone, Robert leaned back in his chair and studied her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Start from the beginning," he said. So she did. Nia told him about her years creating art under other names, about the 47 paintings signed by Michael Rivera that had built Brown Gallery's reputation. She described the board meeting that had destroyed her life, the systematic way they'd frozen her assets and confiscated her possessions, the legal threats designed to keep her silent forever. Robert listened with the focused intensity of a man accustomed to dissecting complex problems. He asked pointed questions about dates, about documentation, about the specific pieces she'd created and when. His business mind was clearly cataloging everything, looking for patterns and inconsistencies. "The authentication reports for several of those pieces don't match the creation timeline you're describing," he said after she'd finished. "Veritas Art has been tracking provenance discrepancies in Brown Gallery's collection for months." "Because Michael Rivera doesn't exist as an artist," Nia replied. "He's a front. Every piece attributed to him came from my hands, my vision, my sleepless nights in that warehouse studio." "You have proof of this?" "I had proof. They confiscated everything, photos, sketches, even the paint tubes I used. They were very thorough in their destruction." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "But I remember every brushstroke of every piece I ever created. I know which paintings were started on rainy days because the humidity affected how the oils blended. I know which ones I finished in a fury of inspiration and which ones took months of careful layering." Robert was quiet for several minutes, turning his coffee cup in his hands. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable. "Why are you telling me this?" This was it. The moment that would either make her plan work or destroy her completely. Nia took a breath, gambling everything on her read of this brilliant, passionate man who understood art the way she did. "Because you want to destroy them and I want to reclaim my identity. Because you need someone who understands their operation from the inside, and I need someone with the resources to expose the truth. And you think we can help each other, how, exactly?" The words came out before she could second-guess herself, before fear could steal her courage, before the magnitude of what she was suggesting could make her retreat into safer territory. "Marry me." Robert went very still, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. "I'm sorry?" "They fear you more than anyone else in the world," Nia continued, her voice gaining strength as she laid out the audacious plan that had been forming in her mind for weeks. The ultimate revenge would be for their discarded daughter to become Mrs. Robert Kane. "And you," she leaned forward, "you get a wife who can give you everything you need to destroy them completely." "You're suggesting a business arrangement," Robert said, his voice carefully controlled. "I'm suggesting we make them pay. Together." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of the most outrageous proposal either of them had ever heard. Nia could see Robert's mind working, processing the implications, the possibilities, the sheer audacious brilliance of using marriage as a weapon against their mutual enemies. What makes you think I'd agree to something so? He paused, searching for the right word. Unconventional? Because you're not conventional, Nia replied. Because you built an empire on seeing opportunities other people missed. Because you understand that sometimes the most effective strategies are the ones nobody expects. And after we destroy them? What then? Then we reassess our arrangement, Nia said, echoing words he might use in a boardroom negotiation. One enemy at a time. Robert was quiet for what felt like an eternity, studying her face like he was trying to read her soul. The gallery hummed around them, laughter, conversation, the soft clink of wine glasses, but in their corner time seemed suspended. When he finally spoke, his smile was sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. When's the wedding? The words hung in the air between them, transforming everything. Nia felt something shift in her chest, relief and terror and exhilaration all tangled together. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. As soon as possible, she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. The sooner I become Mrs. Robert Kane, the sooner we can watch the Browns' world crumble. Robert raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To the most interesting business proposition I've ever received. Nia clinked her teacup against his espresso. To making them pay. The wedding was a small, private affair that felt more like a corporate merger than a romantic ceremony. Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. sharp, in Robert's lawyer's office on the 42nd floor of a gleaming Manhattan tower. The witnesses were Robert's attorney and Nia's former co-worker from the coffee shop, a girl named Sarah who thought Nia had completely lost her mind. Are you absolutely certain about this? Sarah whispered as they waited in the reception area. You've known him for exactly 4 days. Nia smoothed the simple cream dress she'd borrowed from Sarah's closet and checked her reflection in the lobby's mirrored walls. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Which was both completely true and a complete lie depending on how you looked at it. Robert emerged from his lawyer's office looking like he was about to negotiate a hostile takeover rather than exchange wedding vows. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his expression businesslike and controlled. When he saw Nia, something flickered in those gray eyes, surprise maybe, or appreciation for how she'd transformed herself from struggling artist to sophisticated bride. Ready? He asked, offering his arm with the courtesy of a man who'd been raised with impeccable manners despite his rough start. Ready, she replied and meant it. The ceremony itself took less than 20 minutes. Judge Harrison, a family friend of Robert's lawyer, performed the service with efficient professionalism. The vows were standard, traditional, utterly devoid of personal meaning. When Robert slipped the simple platinum band onto her finger, his hands were steady and warm. When she did the same for him, she tried not to think about how perfectly the ring fit, as if it had been made for him. You may kiss the bride, Judge Harrison announced with a smile that suggested he thought this was a genuine love match. Robert's kiss was brief, professional, appropriate for witnesses. But there was something in the way his hand lingered at the small of her back, something in the fraction of a second when his lips pressed against hers, that made Nia's breath catch despite herself. Congratulations, Mrs. Kane, Robert said as they signed the marriage certificate, and hearing her new name spoken aloud sent an unexpected thrill through her chest. Mrs. Robert Kane. The woman who would bring down the Browns simply by existing. They left the courthouse separately, Robert returning to his office, Nia going back to Queens to pack the few possessions she'd accumulated during her months of poverty. 3 hours later, she stood in the lobby of Robert's building with a single suitcase containing everything she owned in the world. The doorman treated her with the deference reserved for residents of the penthouse floor. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt like ascending into another universe entirely. When the doors opened directly into Robert's apartment, Nia stepped into a world of steel and glass and breathtaking beauty. The penthouse was a fortress 30 floors above Manhattan, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city spread out below like a glittering circuit board. But it was the art that took her breath away, original pieces covering every wall, each one carefully chosen and perfectly displayed. A small Picasso hung beside a contemporary photograph that made her heart ache with its raw honesty. An abstract painting she recognized from her art history studies was positioned to catch the afternoon light streaming through the western windows. Everything was authentic, everything was carefully curated, everything spoke to someone who truly understood beauty rather than simply collecting expensive objects. Your reputation for having impeccable taste is well deserved, she murmured, stopping before a painting that made her chest tighten with recognition of its brilliance. Robert emerged from what she assumed was his office, having changed from his wedding suit into dark jeans and a white button-down that made him look younger, more approachable. "I don't buy art as an investment," he said, moving to stand beside her. "I buy it because it speaks to me." "Why this piece?" she asked, genuinely curious about the small canvas that seemed to glow with inner light. He was quiet for a moment, studying the painting as if seeing it for the first time. "I grew up with nothing. No beauty, no culture, no escape from the ugliness of poverty. Art was the first thing that made me believe the world could be more than just survival." The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. This wasn't the ruthless businessman the media portrayed, but someone who understood art the way she did, as salvation, as proof that humans could create something transcendent from pain and hope and raw experience. "The Browns never understood that," she said softly. "For them, it was always just a commodity. Something to be bought and sold and manipulated for maximum profit. Which is why they'll lose." Robert's voice hardened again, the businessman returning. "Beauty can't be faked forever. Truth has a way of surfacing, especially when you have the right tools to expose it." He led her through the penthouse, showing her the guest room that would be hers, the kitchen with its restaurant-quality appliances, the library filled with art books and business journals. Everything was elegant, expensive, and utterly impersonal, like staying in the world's most luxurious hotel. "The prenup protects both of us," Robert explained as they settled in his living room with glasses of wine that probably cost more than Nia had made in a month at the coffee shop. "You get security and resources to rebuild your career. I get a wife who understands the art world and has insider knowledge of Brown Gallery's operations. And when we destroy them? Then we reassess our arrangement." His smile was cold and calculating. "One enemy at a time." They spent the evening discussing strategy over dinner, takeout from an expensive Italian restaurant that Robert had delivered to the penthouse. The conversation was intense, focused, and productive. They compared notes on Brown Gallery's weaknesses, discussed the best approaches for gathering evidence, and planned the timeline for their systematic destruction of Nia's former family. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, Nia found herself watching Robert across the dining table and wondering what he was like when he wasn't planning corporate warfare. Did he laugh? Did he have hobbies beyond work and art collecting? Did he ever let his guard down completely? "You're very quiet," he observed as they cleared the dishes. "Just processing," she replied. "This morning I was Nia Brown, broke and invisible. Tonight I'm Mrs. Robert Kane, living in a penthouse and planning revenge against some of the most powerful people in the art world. It's a lot to absorb." Robert paused in loading the dishwasher. Apparently even billionaires did their own dishes sometimes, and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Any regrets?" Nia considered the question seriously. This morning she'd been nobody with nothing, sleeping on a mattress on the floor in Queens. Tonight she was married to one of the most successful men in New York, surrounded by beauty and comfort and the promise of justice. "None," she said finally. "Do you have any?" "Ask me again when this is over," Robert replied, but something in his voice suggested the answer might be more complicated than either of them expected. As Nia lay in the guest room that night, she tried to ignore the strange hollowness in her chest. She'd gotten everything she'd wanted: protection, resources, and the perfect weapon against the Browns. So why did she feel like something was missing? The war room took shape over the course of 3 weeks, transforming Robert's home office into a command center for systematic revenge. Charts covered the walls, mapping Brown Gallery's financial structures, client relationships, and exhibition schedules. File cabinets held forensic reports, authentication documents, and legal briefs. A massive whiteboard displayed a timeline of their planned assault, color-coded and cross-referenced with military precision. It was the beginning of their second month as husband and wife when Nia stood before the whiteboard at 7 in the morning, coffee in hand, studying the intricate web of connections they'd uncovered. The routine had become comfortable, almost domestic in its familiarity. "The Hartwell collection sale is happening next month," she said as Robert emerged from his morning shower, hair still damp, wearing a navy suit that made his eyes look almost silver. 3 pieces attributed to Michael Rivera, total value estimated at $12 million. "All 3 painted by you?" Robert asked, moving to stand beside her. The scent of his cologne was subtle, expensive, and increasingly distracting in ways that had nothing to do with their business arrangement. "Every brushstroke." Nia pointed to the photographs pinned beneath the timeline, trying to ignore how natural it felt to have him close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "That one took me 6 months to complete. I remember because I was experimenting with a new technique for layering transparencies, and Elena kept complaining about how long it was taking." Robert's jaw tightened at the mention of Elena Brown. Over the past weeks, he developed a particular hatred for Nia's adoptive mother, whose calculated cruelty seemed to offend him on a deeply personal level. Veritas Art can prove those pieces were created before Michael Rivera's supposed artistic breakthrough. The paint composition analysis alone will be devastating. Their morning briefings had become routine: coffee, strategy, coordinated attacks on their mutual enemies. But somewhere between the forensic accounting reports and the authentication analyses, something had shifted between them. Their conversations had become more personal, more intimate. Their working relationship was evolving into something neither of them had planned. "Richard's calling an emergency board meeting this afternoon," Nia reported, checking her phone for updates from the private investigator they'd hired to monitor Brown Gallery's activities. Stock price dropped another 8% yesterday after the Times article about questionable provenance in their permanent collection. "Good." Robert's smile was sharp with satisfaction. "Fear makes people sloppy. Desperate people make mistakes." The resources at Robert's disposal were staggering. Private investigators who could uncover financial records going back decades. Forensic accountants who specialized in art market fraud. Authentication experts who could prove the age and provenance of any piece using cutting-edge technology. Legal teams who lived for complex cases involving intellectual property theft. But it was Nia's insider knowledge that made their campaign truly devastating. She knew which collectors had been overcharged for pieces of questionable authenticity. She knew which museum loans had involved forged documentation. She knew exactly how the Browns operated, their patterns, their weaknesses, their carefully hidden vulnerabilities. "Michael's having lunch with the curator from MoMA tomorrow," she said, reading from another update. "Probably trying to secure that retrospective exhibition they've been pushing for." "Perfect timing," Robert replied. "The authentication report on his supposed early works will be released tomorrow morning. By lunchtime, no reputable museum will want to be associated with his name." They worked together with the efficiency of a long-established team, each anticipating the other's needs and thought processes. When Nia needed technical details about blockchain authentication, Robert provided them. When Robert needed insight into gallery politics and client relationships, Nia delivered comprehensive briefings. But it was during their quiet dinners that the real connection developed. Away from charts and strategies, they talked about art, about their childhoods, about the experiences that had shaped them into the people they'd become. Robert told her about his first visit to a museum, about the scholarship programs that had changed his life, about the loneliness of building an empire while remaining fundamentally isolated. Nia shared stories about her early artistic development, about the foster home she'd lived in before the Browns adopted her, about the devastating realization that the family she'd thought loved her had only seen her as a profitable asset. "What will you do when this is over?" Robert asked one evening in their 7th week of marriage as they sat in his living room, surrounded by the art collection that had become familiar and comforting to her. "When you have your identity back?" It was a question she'd been avoiding even in her own thoughts. 4 months, revenge had been her only goal, her sole motivation for getting out of bed each morning. The idea of a future beyond destroying the Browns felt impossible to contemplate. "Paint, I suppose," she said finally. "Try to rebuild my reputation under my own name." "You could do more than that. You could build your own gallery, your own empire. Compete directly with the people who tried to erase you." "With what resources?" "They left me with nothing." Robert's eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're Mrs. Robert Kane now. You have access to everything I have." The reminder of their arrangement sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. In the weeks since their wedding, she'd almost forgotten it was fake. Living in his space, planning their revenge together, sharing quiet dinners and intense conversations about art and life, it had started to feel like a real marriage in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. Which was dangerous territory because Robert Kane was using her just as strategically as she was using him. Their marriage was a business transaction, nothing more. The fact that she'd started looking forward to his company, started noticing the way his rare genuine smiles transformed his entire face, started feeling genuinely cared for in his presence. None of that changed the fundamental reality of their situation. By their 8th week of marriage, the forensic analysis of paint samples was complete. 12 pieces in Brown Gallery's permanent collection show composition inconsistencies with their attributed creation dates, Robert said, sliding a thick folder across the table during one of their evening strategy sessions. "The evidence is irrefutable." Nia opened the folder and found herself looking at scientific proof of what she'd always known, that her work had been systematically misattributed, misdated, and sold under false pretenses. The technical language was clinical, but the implications were explosive. "This will destroy them," she said quietly. "Completely," Robert confirmed. "The insurance claims alone will bankrupt them. And that's before the lawsuits from defrauded collectors begin." They sat in comfortable silence, both contemplating the magnitude of what they were about to unleash. In a matter of weeks, the Brown family empire would crumble. Richard, Elena, and Michael would face financial ruin, legal prosecution, and permanent exile from the art world they dominated for decades. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, Nia found herself studying Robert's profile as he reviewed the authentication reports, wondering what would happen to them when their mutual enemy was defeated. Their arrangement had been designed with a clear endpoint: destroy the Browns, then reassess their relationship. But somewhere in the past 2 months, the thought of reassessing had become more complicated than either of them had anticipated. "Robert," she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the questions that had been keeping her awake at night. He looked up from the documents, those perceptive eyes focused entirely on her. In the lamplight, his expression was softer than his usual business demeanor, more approachable. "What is it?" "Nothing," she said, retreating from the dangerous territory of feelings and future plans. "Just thinking about timing for the next phase." But as they returned to their strategic planning, Nia couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning more than the Browns' destruction. She was planning the end of the most meaningful relationship she'd ever had, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that kind of victory. 3 months after their strategic wedding, Robert and Nia sat in his penthouse at dawn, watching the sun rise over Manhattan while their carefully orchestrated plan went live across the art world. The morning air was crisp with autumn promise, but the real electricity came from knowing that by sunset, the Brown family empire would be in ruins. "It's live," Robert announced, closing his laptop with satisfaction. The Art News exclusive had published at exactly 6 a.m. Eastern, time to hit when galleries would be opening across the country and international collectors would be checking their morning news feeds. Nia's hands trembled slightly as she refreshed her phone screen, watching the story spread across social media like wildfire. The headline was devastating in its simplicity: "Major fraud investigation rocks Brown galleries. Forensic evidence suggests systematic deception." The article was meticulously researched, backed by months of forensic analysis and legal documentation. VeritasArt's authentication technology had exposed discrepancies in dozens of pieces, revealing a pattern of misattribution that stretched back years. Paint composition analysis proved that works supposedly created in different decades had actually been painted within months of each other. Provenance documentation showed suspicious gaps and inconsistencies that suggested deliberate falsification. "Look at this," Nia said, scrolling through the comment section. "Collectors are already demanding investigations of their own purchases. The Whitman Foundation is calling for an emergency review of their entire Brown Gallery's collection." Robert moved to stand behind her chair, reading over her shoulder. The warmth of his presence was becoming dangerously familiar, comforting in a way that made her forget their arrangement was temporary. "The forensic accountant's report comes out this afternoon. That's when the real damage begins." Nia's phone buzzed with the first panicked call from Richard Brown. She let it go to voicemail, then played the message on speaker so Robert could hear the desperation in her adoptive father's voice. "Nia, sweetheart, I know we've had our differences, but this attack on our family business is getting out of hand. We need to talk. Whatever Robert Kane has promised you, we can work something out. Call me back immediately." "Sweetheart," Robert repeated with disgust. 3 months ago he called you a liability and froze your bank accounts." The second call came from Elena, her voice shaking with a combination of rage and fear. "You ungrateful little snake. After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us? Marrying our enemy and feeding him lies about our business practices? You're destroying the family that gave you everything." Nia felt Robert's hand settle gently on her shoulder, a gesture of support that sent warmth spreading through her chest. "They never considered you family," he said quietly. "Family don't dispose of their own children when they become inconvenient." By 10 a.m., Brown Gallery's stock price had dropped 15%. By noon it was down 30% and still falling. The phones in their Manhattan location were ringing constantly, collectors demanding authentication reviews, insurance companies requiring immediate documentation, museums postponing planned exhibitions. The forensic accounting report dropped at 2 p.m. like a bomb detonating in the heart of the art world. The financial analysis revealed a sophisticated money laundering operation hidden beneath Brown Gallery's legitimate transactions. Suspicious cash payments, inflated valuations, and connections to known art forgery networks painted a picture of corruption that went far beyond simple misattribution. Richard's calling another emergency board meeting, Nia reported, monitoring the private investigators' real-time updates. This is the third one this week. The board members are starting to panic. Robert was tracking multiple news feeds simultaneously, his expression growing more satisfied with each devastating headline. The Times is running a follow-up investigation tomorrow. They've been interviewing former employees who are willing to go on record about the company's questionable practices. Michael's carefully constructed identity as an artistic genius began crumbling within hours. Art critics who had praised his intuitive understanding of light and shadow were now questioning whether he had ever held a paintbrush. Museums that had featured his work in prominent exhibitions were quietly removing pieces from display. The retrospective at MoMA was cancelled without explanation. "Look at this," Nia said, showing Robert her phone screen. A former Brown Galleries employee had posted a tell-all thread on social media, complete with photographs of Nia working in her studio and documents proving her real role in creating the company's most valuable pieces. The post was going viral, shared thousands of times by artists, collectors, and critics who were horrified by the systematic exploitation they were witnessing. The art world was small and interconnected. Everyone knew someone who had worked with Brown Galleries. The whispers and rumors that had circulated for years were finally being confirmed with hard evidence. "Elena's trying to reach you again," Robert observed as Nia's phone buzzed for the 7th time that afternoon. This time Nia answered. "Finally." Elena's voice was shrill with desperation. "You need to stop this madness immediately. Do you have any idea what you're doing to our family's reputation?" "I know exactly what I'm doing," Nia replied, her voice steady and cold. "I'm telling the truth about who really created those paintings. Something you should have done years ago. Those paintings exist because of our resources, our connections, our reputation in the art world. Without the Brown name. Without my talent, you'd have nothing," Nia cut her off. "No reputation, no connections, no empire built on stolen genius. Just 3 mediocre people with expensive tastes and no actual ability. You're destroying everything we built together." "You built nothing with me," Nia said, feeling years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. "You built something on top of me, using me as a foundation while keeping me invisible. Now the foundation is gone, and your empire is collapsing exactly as it should." She hung up before Elena could respond, her hands steady for the first time in months. Robert was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, pride, maybe, or admiration for the woman she was becoming. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like breathing again," Nia replied honestly. "Like finally being able to exhale after holding my breath for 5 years." By evening, Brown Galleries had lost 60% of its market value. Major collectors were threatening lawsuits. Insurance companies were launching their own investigations. The family that had dominated New York's art scene for decades was facing complete financial and social destruction. Robert poured champagne as they watched the sunset paint Manhattan in shades of gold and orange. "To the first day of justice," he said, raising his glass. "To the first day of the rest of my life," Nia replied, clinking her glass against his. But as they celebrated their victory, Nia couldn't shake the thought of returning to a life without Robert Kane was almost as terrifying as the thought of staying in a marriage that had never been real. The systematic destruction of Brown Galleries unfolded over the following month like a masterpiece of coordinated warfare. Robert and Nia released new evidence with surgical precision. Each revelation carefully timed to maximize damage while the previous scandal was still dominating headlines. Week 2 brought the authentication reports that shattered Michael Rivera's artistic reputation completely. Veritas Art's analysis proved that 47 paintings attributed to him had been created by the same hand, using identical paint compositions and brush techniques that formed a clear artistic fingerprint. The evidence was so comprehensive that even Michael's most devoted supporters couldn't argue with the scientific data. The Whitney Museum just announced they're removing all Michael Rivera pieces from their permanent collection, Nia reported from her position at the War Room's monitoring station. She'd claimed the corner desk as her own, surrounding it with newspapers, printouts, and multiple screens tracking the unfolding chaos. Robert looked up from his laptop, where he was coordinating with their legal team about the next phase of revelations. "Good. The Guggenheim will follow within hours. They can't afford to display fraudulent work while maintaining their reputation for authenticity." The morning light streaming through the penthouse windows caught the satisfaction in his gray eyes. Over the past month, Nia had learned to read his expressions, to recognize the subtle differences between his business face and the moments when his guard dropped. Right now, he looked like a chess master watching his opponent realize they'd been checkmated. Week 3 delivered the financial records that revealed Brown Gallery's money laundering operations. The forensic accountants had traced suspicious transactions going back 7 years, cash payments from untraceable sources, inflated valuations on questionable pieces, and a network of shell companies that existed solely to obscure the true ownership of artworks. "Richard's been arrested," Nia announced, reading from her phone with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. "Federal charges for money laundering and fraud. Elena and Michael are being questioned by the FBI." The news hit her harder than she'd expected. Despite everything they'd done to her, seeing her adoptive father led away in handcuffs on the evening news felt surreal. For 26 years, Richard Brown had been the most powerful person in her world. Successful, confident, seemingly untouchable. Watching him stumble under the weight of federal charges was both satisfying and strangely sad. Robert moved to stand behind her chair, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. The gesture had become natural over their weeks of working together, a source of comfort that she'd started to depend on without realizing it. "Second thoughts?" he asked quietly. "None," Nia replied, leaning back against his warmth. "They made their choices. They destroyed people's lives for profit, including mine. This is just consequence catching up to cause." The masterpiece of their revenge campaign came in week 4, the time-stamped video evidence of Nia creating the paintings that had made Michael Rivera famous. Robert's technical team had recovered security footage from the warehouse where she'd worked, using advanced enhancement software to create crystal-clear documentation of her artistic process. The video went viral within hours of its release. Art lovers around the world watched in fascination as Nia brought canvas after canvas to life with passionate intensity, her movements fluid and confident as she layered colors and created depth. The footage showed her working at all hours: dawn sessions when the light was perfect, midnight marathons when inspiration struck, weekend sprints to meet exhibition deadlines. "Look at the comments," Robert said, scrolling through the responses on social media. "People are calling you a genius. The real genius behind Brown Gallery's success." Nia watched herself on screen, remembering each piece, each moment of creative flow captured by cameras she'd never known existed. The woman in the video looked so young, so passionate, so completely absorbed in the act of creation. She'd been happy then, despite her invisibility. Art had been enough to sustain her. "I missed that," she said softly. "That complete absorption in creating something beautiful." "You could have it again," Robert replied. "Your own studio, your own gallery, complete creative freedom. No one telling you what to paint or whose name to put in the corner." The offer hung between them, laden with implications neither of them was ready to address directly. In a few days, Brown Galleries would declare bankruptcy. Richard, Elena, and Michael would face years of legal battles and financial ruin. Their mutual enemy would be completely defeated, their arrangement officially complete. But what then? Sometimes achieving everything you wanted leaves you wondering what comes next. When revenge is complete and justice is served, how do you build a life beyond the fight? The final blow came when major insurance companies filed lawsuits demanding the return of funds paid for fraudulent artwork. The claims totaled over $200 million. Money that Brown Gallery simply didn't have. Their assets were frozen, their accounts seized, their reputation so thoroughly destroyed that no legitimate art dealer would work with them. "It's over," Robert announced one evening as they reviewed the final financial reports. "Brown Galleries will file for bankruptcy tomorrow morning. The family is finished." They sat in the living room that had become their shared space, surrounded by Robert's authentic art collection. Pieces chosen for beauty rather than profit, displayed with genuine appreciation rather than calculated positioning. The contrast with Brown Gallery's soulless showroom was stark and telling. "How do you feel?" Robert asked, pouring wine from a bottle he'd been saving for this moment. Nia considered the question seriously. She should feel triumphant, satisfied, complete. The people who had stolen her identity and destroyed her future were facing total ruin. Her artistic genius was finally recognized and celebrated. Justice had been served with devastating thoroughness. Instead, she felt empty. "Like I need to figure out who I am when I'm not fighting them," she said finally. "For months, revenge was the only thing keeping me going. Now that it's finished." "Now you get to discover what you really want," Robert finished. "Beyond justice, beyond proving your worth to people who never deserved you in the first place." He was right, but the thought was terrifying. Building a life based on hope rather than anger, creating art for joy rather than vindication. opening herself to possibilities beyond the narrow focus of revenge. It all felt impossibly vulnerable after months of armor-plated determination. "What do you want?" she asked, turning the question back to him. Robert was quiet for a long moment, swirling wine in his glass while he considered his answer. When he looked up, his expression was uncharacteristically uncertain. "I want—" he began, then stopped, seeming to wrestle with words that wouldn't come easily. "I've spent so long focused on business, on building empire and destroying enemies, that I'm not sure I remember how to want things that aren't strategic." The admission hung between them, raw and honest in a way that made Nia's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. This was Robert Kane stripped of his billionaire armor, just a man who'd spent so long fighting that he'd forgotten how to simply live. "Maybe we could figure it out together," she said softly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Their eyes met across the coffee table, and Nia felt something shift in the air between them. The business arrangement that had brought them together was complete, but something else was beginning. Something that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with two people who'd helped each other remember what it felt like to be understood. Tomorrow Brown Galleries will cease to exist. Tonight, Robert and Nia sat in a penthouse filled with beautiful art, wondering if the partnership that had destroyed their enemies might be strong enough to build something beautiful for themselves. The war was over. The question was whether they were brave enough to try peace. The morning Brown Galleries officially declared bankruptcy should have been the greatest day of Nia's life. Instead, she woke up in the guest room of Robert's penthouse feeling hollow and strangely lost. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan spread out below like a glittering promise, but all she could think about was the conversation they'd been avoiding for days. What happened now? Robert was already in the kitchen when she emerged, dressed in his usual morning uniform of dark jeans and a white button-down, reading financial reports on his tablet while coffee brewed. The domestic scene felt both natural and fragile, like something that could shatter if examined too closely. After nearly 3 months of shared mornings, the routine had become precious to her in ways she hadn't expected. "The final paperwork was filed an hour ago," he said without looking up, but she caught the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested he was as aware of the implications as she was. "Brown Galleries is officially dissolved. All assets liquidated, all debts transferred to the bankruptcy court. And Richard pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence. He'll serve 18 months minimum." Robert's voice was matter-of-fact, but Nia caught the way he glanced up to monitor her reaction carefully. She should feel vindicated. Richard Brown, the man who had built an empire on her stolen genius, was facing prison time and complete financial ruin. Elena and Michael were social pariahs, their reputations so thoroughly destroyed that they'd fled New York entirely. Justice had been served with devastating thoroughness. So why did she feel like something was ending instead of beginning? "Nia." Robert's voice was gentler now, and she looked up to find him studying her face with the kind of attention that made her feel truly seen. "Talk to me." "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel," she admitted, accepting the coffee he offered with hands that weren't quite steady. 4 months, destroying them was the only thing that mattered. It was my purpose, my motivation, my reason for getting out of bed every morning. Now it's done and I feel adrift, Robert finished quietly, and something in his tone suggested he understood that particular feeling intimately. "Yes." The admission felt like confessing a weakness, but Robert's expression showed understanding rather than judgment. "We accomplished everything we set out to do. They're destroyed, I'm vindicated, justice is served. But now what? What do people like us do when the war is over?" They stood in the kitchen drinking coffee in comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts they weren't ready to voice. Outside, the city was waking up to a world where Brown Galleries no longer existed, where Nia Brown was finally recognized as the artistic genius she'd always been, where justice had prevailed in the most complete way possible. But inside the penthouse, two people who had started as strangers using each other for revenge were discovering that success could be as terrifying as failure when it meant their partnership might be ending. "There's something I need to show you," Robert said suddenly, setting down his coffee cup with the kind of decision that suggested he'd been wrestling with this moment for days. "Something I should have shown you weeks ago." He led her through the penthouse to a door she'd noticed but never seen him open. His private office, separate from the war room where they'd planned their campaign. When he pushed it open, Nia's breath caught in her throat. An easel stood in the center of the room, holding a canvas that made her heart stop. It was a portrait of her, but not the polished, careful version of herself she presented to the world. This was her as she looked when she thought no one was watching. Vulnerable and fierce and beautiful in her raw honesty. "When did you paint this?" she whispered, moving closer to study the brushwork that captured not just her physical features but something deeper, more essential about who she was. I've been working on it for weeks, Robert said, his voice carrying an uncertainty she'd never heard before. Since I realized that this arrangement we made, this business partnership we entered into, had become something else entirely for me. The painting was extraordinary, created with the skill of someone who truly understood art as more than commodity. Every brushstroke showed careful observation, genuine emotion, deep appreciation for the subject. This wasn't the work of a casual collector or weekend hobbyist. This was the creation of someone with real talent who had returned to something precious he'd abandoned. Robert, this is... She turned to face him, seeing vulnerability in his expression that took her breath away. This is incredible. You have genuine talent. I stopped painting when Kane Industries started consuming my life, he said, moving to stand beside her. Told myself I wasn't good enough to matter, that building an empire was more important than creating art. But watching you work, seeing your passion for creation, remembering what art used to mean to me, it brought something back that I thought I'd lost forever. The confession hung between them, heavy with implications that neither of them could ignore any longer. This wasn't about revenge or business arrangements or strategic partnerships. This was about two people who had found something real in the midst of orchestrated destruction. Why are you showing me this now? Nia asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Because our arrangement is officially complete, Robert said, his voice carefully controlled but his hands betraying slight tremor as he gestured toward the painting. Brown Galleries is destroyed, your identity is restored, justice has been served. According to our agreement, we should be discussing divorce terms and future arrangements. The word, divorce, landed between them like a physical blow. Nia had known this moment was coming, had been dreading it for weeks, but hearing it spoken aloud made the reality unavoidable. After 3 months of shared mornings, collaborative planning, quiet dinners, and growing intimacy, the idea of returning to separate lives felt impossible. But, she prompted, sensing there was more, hoping desperately that there was more. Robert moved closer, close enough that she could see the war between hope and uncertainty in his expression. But I don't want to discuss divorce terms. I don't want to reassess our arrangement or negotiate new contracts or pretend that what's happened between us was just strategic convenience. What are you saying? I'm saying that somewhere between planning revenge and watching you reclaim your power, I fell in love with my fake wife. His smile was soft and real and completely unguarded. And I'm hoping, probably foolishly, that she might have fallen in love with her fake husband too. The words she'd been afraid to think, let alone speak, finally found their voice. What if I told you that I stopped pretending weeks ago? That this marriage stopped feeling fake the moment you started treating me like I mattered more than the revenge we were planning? Then I'd say we should stop calling it fake, Robert replied, reaching up to cup her face in his hands with a tenderness that made her heart race. I'd say we should figure out what we want our real marriage to look like. Even though it started as a business arrangement? Even though we used each other? Especially because of that, Robert said firmly. We chose each other for strategic reasons, but we stayed together for real ones. We've seen each other at our most calculating and our most vulnerable. We've fought the same enemies and built something beautiful from shared pain. If that's not a foundation for authentic love, I don't know what is. Nia looked up at the man who had started as her weapon against the Browns and become something infinitely more precious. Robert Kane, billionaire and art lover, strategic genius and secret artist, the person who had helped her remember who she was when everyone else wanted her to disappear. I love you, she said simply, watching his face transform with relief and joy. Not Robert Kane the billionaire or the man who destroyed my enemies. I love you, the person who understands art as salvation, who paints portraits that capture souls, who makes me feel like I finally have a real home. When he kissed her, it wasn't the brief, professional contact of their wedding day. This was a kiss that tasted like coffee and possibility, like years of loneliness finally ending, like two people who had found exactly what they didn't know they were searching for. Outside, Manhattan glittered with endless opportunity. Inside the penthouse, surrounded by authentic art and genuine feeling, Nia and Robert held each other and realized that the best revenge wasn't destroying your enemies, it was building something so beautiful and real that their lies couldn't compete. Their war was over. Their love story was just beginning. I want to show you something, Nia said the next morning, taking Robert's hand and leading him through the penthouse to the spare room she'd quietly converted over the past month. She'd been working on this in secret, using the late hours when he was in business calls to create something purely for herself. When she opened the door, Robert's sharp intake of breath told her everything she needed to know. The room had been transformed into a working artist's studio. Canvases lined the walls in various stages of completion, paint supplies organized with careful precision, morning light streaming through windows she'd cleared of furniture to maximize natural illumination. But it was the artwork itself that made Robert go completely still. These weren't the calculated, commercial pieces she'd created for Brown Galleries. These were raw, honest, passionate works that seemed to pulse with life and emotion. Abstract compositions that captured the feeling of rebirth after destruction. Portraits that revealed the soul beneath surface beauty. Landscapes that spoke to the longing for home and belonging that had defined her entire life. "Nia," Robert whispered, moving slowly through the space like he was walking through a cathedral. "These are extraordinary." "I've been painting again," she said, suddenly nervous about his reaction to seeing her authentic artistic voice. "Real painting for myself. Not because someone commissioned it or because it would sell for a certain price, but because I needed to create something true." Robert stopped in front of a large canvas that dominated the far wall, a complex, layered piece about transformation and hope rising from the ashes of betrayal. The colors seemed to shift and breathe in the morning light, telling a story that went beyond words or logic straight to the emotional core of human experience. "This is you," he said finally, turning to look at her with wonder in his gray eyes. "The real you. Not the artist they tried to suppress or the weapon we turned you into for revenge. This is who you are when you're completely free to be yourself." The recognition in his voice brought tears to her eyes. For so many years she'd created what other people wanted, painted what would sell, buried her authentic artistic voice beneath layers of commercial expectation. These pieces represented the first time since childhood that she'd been completely honest on canvas. "I haven't painted like this since I was a child," she admitted, joining him in front of the transformation piece. "Before the Browns, before I learned to create what other people expected. You gave me that back, the freedom to be myself without apology or compromise." "We gave that to each other," Robert corrected, his arms sliding around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "You reminded me that art isn't just investment or decoration, it's the courage to make something beautiful from whatever life gives you." He led her to a smaller easel positioned near the window, where he'd been working on his own secret project. The canvas showed the view from their living room window, Manhattan spreading out in all its chaotic glory, but painted with the eye of someone who saw poetry in steel and glass, beauty in the controlled chaos of urban life. "I've been painting too," he said quietly. "First time in 10 years. Turns out building an empire doesn't satisfy the same part of the soul as creating something with your own hands." Nia studied his technique, recognizing real talent that had been suppressed by years of corporate focus. His brushwork was confident, his use of color sophisticated, his composition showing an innate understanding of how to guide the viewer's eye through emotional narrative. "Robert, this is beautiful. You're genuinely gifted." "I'm rusty," he said with the modesty of someone rediscovering a lost part of himself. "But being around your passion, watching you create with such intensity, it woke something up that I thought I'd killed permanently." They spent the morning moving through both their collections, sharing the stories behind each piece, explaining the emotions and experiences that had shaped their creative choices. It was the most intimate conversation they'd ever had, more revealing than any business strategy or personal confession. "What if we did this together?" Nia asked suddenly, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. "Not just marriage but actual creative partnership. You have the business expertise and resources. I have the artistic vision and industry connections we'll need. What are you suggesting?" "Kane Gallery," she said, her voice gaining excitement as the possibilities unfolded in her mind. "Our own space, our own rules, our own vision for what art can be when it's chosen for beauty rather than profit." Robert's eyes lit up with the same intensity she'd seen when he was planning the destruction of Brown Galleries. But this wasn't about revenge or strategy, this was about building something beautiful and meaningful from shared passion. "We could showcase emerging artists who remind us of ourselves," he said, his business mind already working through the possibilities. "People with real talent who need someone to believe in their vision. Artists who create because they have to, not because they're chasing trends or market approval," Nia added. "We could build the kind of gallery we both wish had existed when we were starting out." The vision took shape between them with startling clarity. A gallery that prioritized authenticity over commercialism, that gave artists the support and recognition they deserved, that proved beauty and profit could coexist without compromising artistic integrity. "We'd be direct competitors with every major gallery in the city," Robert pointed out, but his tone suggested challenge rather than concern. "Good," Nia replied with a smile that was pure steel wrapped in silk. Let them try to compete with authentic passion and genuine artistic vision. Let them try to match what we can build when we're creating from love instead of greed. They spent the rest of the day planning their future with the same meticulous attention to detail they'd brought to destroying their enemies. But this time, instead of charts tracking financial destruction, they were sketching gallery layouts and artist development programs. Instead of plotting systematic revenge, they were designing systems to nurture and support creative talent. "The opening exhibition should be yours," Robert said as evening light painted the studio in shades of gold and amber. Nia Brown's first show under her own name, featuring the work they tried to suppress and the art you've created since finding your freedom. "Our opening exhibition," she corrected. Nia and Robert Kane, presenting authentic art created by authentic artists who refuse to compromise their vision for anyone's approval. When he kissed her this time, surrounded by their combined creative work and illuminated by dreams of the future they would build together, Nia felt something she'd never experienced before, complete certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. They had started as strangers using each other for revenge. They had become partners planning systematic destruction. Now they were something infinitely more precious, two artistic souls who had found their way home to each other and were ready to create something beautiful enough to heal the wounds the art world had inflicted on them both. The war was over. The real love story was just beginning. And their greatest masterpiece would be the life they built together. 2 years later, Nia stood in the main gallery of Kane Gallery, surrounded by her own artwork displayed under her own name for the first time in her adult life. The space hummed with the energy of opening night. Critics, collectors, and art lovers filling every corner, their voices creating a symphony of appreciation and discovery. The gallery itself was a masterpiece of design, created in Robert's image of what an art space should be. Clean lines and perfect lighting showcased each piece to maximum advantage, while comfortable seating areas invited visitors to linger and truly absorb the emotional impact of the work. This wasn't a sterile showroom designed to move expensive inventory, this was a sanctuary for authentic artistic expression. "Mrs. Kane?" A young reporter approached with a digital recorder, her eyes bright with the hunger of someone chasing a career-making story. "How does it feel to finally have your identity back?" Nia glanced across the room to where Robert was deep in conversation with a museum curator, probably discussing the addition of one of her pieces to their permanent collection. He caught her eye and smiled, not the sharp, calculated expression he wore in business meetings, but the soft, real smile he reserved for moments when his guard was completely down. "Identity isn't something that can be stolen," she said finally, turning back to the reporter. "It can be suppressed, hidden, denied, but it can't be destroyed. Sometimes it just takes the right person to help you remember who you really are." The opening was everything they dreamed it would be. Collectors who had once dismissed her as just another Brown Gallery's artist were now studying her work with genuine respect and fascination. Critics who had praised Michael Rivera's stolen genius were writing enthusiastic reviews of Nia's authentic vision. Museums were already inquiring about future exhibitions and permanent acquisitions. But more importantly, the gallery was fulfilling its deeper purpose. In the smaller rooms, they showcased emerging artists who reminded them of their younger selves, talented creators who needed someone to believe in their vision, to give them the platform and support that traditional galleries withheld. "The Transformation series is extraordinary," commented Dr. Elizabeth Chin, the curator from the Whitney Museum. "The way you've captured the emotional journey from destruction to rebirth, it's some of the most powerful work I've seen in years." "And your family?" the reporter pressed, clearly fishing for drama. "The Browns?" Nia's smile was serene, completely free of the bitterness that had once consumed her. "They taught me that family isn't about blood or adoption papers. It's about the people who see your true self and love you anyway." The reporter scribbled notes eagerly, but Nia was no longer focused on the interview. Across the gallery she could see the life she and Robert had built together. Artists whose careers they'd launched, collectors who had learned to value authenticity over investment potential, critics who had rediscovered their passion for genuine artistic expression. Richard Brown was serving the final months of his prison sentence in minimum security facility upstate. Elena had moved to a modest house in Florida, her social status destroyed beyond repair. Michael worked at a small gallery in Portland, finally forced to survive on his own limited abilities rather than stolen genius. They had been completely erased from the art world they'd once dominated, their names now synonymous with fraud and deception. But Nia found she rarely thought about them anymore. Revenge had been satisfying, but building something beautiful had proven infinitely more fulfilling. "Any advice for other artists who might be in similar situations?" the reporter asked. Find your own voice, Nia replied without hesitation. Create your own truth. And never let anyone convince you that your worth is determined by their approval. As the evening progressed, Nia moved through the gallery like a queen surveying her kingdom. Every painting on the walls told part of her story, the pain of betrayal, the fury of injustice, the gradual healing that came from being seen and valued and loved completely. Robert appeared at her side as the last guests were leaving, slipping his arm around her waist in the gesture that had become their signature of mutual support and affection. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing the question he'd posed on their first night as a married couple. Nia looked around the gallery they'd built together, at the evidence of her reclaimed identity and rediscovered artistic voice. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that devastating boardroom confrontation to this moment of complete triumph and authentic happiness. "None," she said, meaning it completely. "They gave me the greatest gift they could. They showed me exactly who I didn't want to be." "And who do you want to be?" The question that had once terrified her now felt like the simplest thing in the world to answer. Nia looked up at the man who had helped her rebuild from nothing into something extraordinary, who had shown her that authentic love could grow from the most strategic beginnings. "Myself," she said simply. "Finally, completely myself." Robert kissed her then, soft and sweet and real, while the Manhattan skyline glittered beyond the gallery windows. Around them, her paintings seemed to glow in the carefully designed lighting, each one a testament to the power of authentic creative expression. Outside, the city pulsed with dreams and ambitions and people fighting to become who they were meant to be. But inside Kane Gallery, surrounded by art that told the truth and held by a love that had grown from strategy into something genuine and lasting, Nia Brown Kane had everything she'd ever wanted. She had her identity back. She had her art displayed with pride under her own name. She had built a real family with a man who understood her soul completely. The most beautiful endings are really new beginnings in disguise. When you reclaim your authentic self and find someone who loves all of you, the whole world becomes possible. And she had learned that sometimes the most beautiful creations come from the ashes of the worst betrayals. From the destruction of everything false, something magnificently true had emerged. A love story that proved an authentic connection could triumph over any deception, and an artistic legacy that would outlast every lie ever told about who she really was. The war was over. The love story was eternal. And the art would speak her truth forever. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that your authentic self is your greatest masterpiece, smash that like button right now. Your support helps us bring you more incredible tales of love, justice, and transformation. I want to hear from you in the comments. What's one dream or goal you've been putting off because someone told you it was impossible? Nia's story proves that it's never too late to reclaim your power and create the life you deserve. Drop your dreams below. Let's inspire each other to be fearlessly authentic. And if you're new to our Mr. Ashbourne Golden Narratives family, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We share stories like this every day, tales that will make you believe in love, justice, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. Remember, your authentic self is your greatest revenge against anyone who ever tried to diminish you. Until next time, keep writing your own beautiful story.